Focus on yourself long enough, and the mask begins to fall. What remains is who you were meant to be.
There is a moment most people never talk about. Not the moment you fail, not the moment you lose someone, but the moment you are sitting in a quiet room, everything in your life looks fine from the outside, and yet you feel absolutely hollow. Like you have been running a race no one told you was happening, in a direction you never chose, wearing a face you built to please people whose names you barely remember. That moment, right there, that is what Carl Jung spent his entire life trying to explain. And almost no one is talking about it honestly. Most advice about self-improvement tells you to work harder, compare less, and love yourself. It sounds reasonable. It even sounds kind. But it misses something enormous. It misses the fact that the problem is not laziness or insecurity or low self-esteem. The problem is something far older and far quieter than any of that. The problem is that somewhere along the way, you handed over the controls of your inner life to the outside world. And you did it so gradually, so naturally, that you never noticed it happening. You thought you were adapting. You thought you were growing. But what you were actually doing was disappearing. One small compromise at a time. This is not a video about hating other people or running away from the world. This is about something Jung called individuation, the deep, often painful, always necessary process of becoming who you actually are, instead of who the world needed you to be. By the time this is over, you will understand not just why you feel the way you feel, but what is actually possible on the other side of that feeling. Stay with it. Because what comes next may be the most honest thing you have heard in a long time. Let us start at the very beginning, not with philosophy, with something you have lived. Think about the last time you did something without checking how it would look, not secretly, not guiltily, but freely, just because something inside you wanted to. For most people, they have to think back a long time to find that memory. Children do it constantly. A child draws a picture not because someone will admire it, but because something in them needs to make it. A child laughs not because it is appropriate, but because something is actually funny. A child cries without first calculating whether crying is acceptable in this situation. Children live from the inside out. Then something changes. Adults start watching. Reactions start mattering. The child learns, slowly and without anyone announcing it, that certain expressions get warmth and others get silence. That certain emotions bring people closer and others push them away. That being a particular version of yourself makes life smoother, easier, safer. And so the child begins to sculpt themselves, not with intention, not even with awareness, but with the very natural, very understandable desire to belong. Jung called the structure that results from this sculpting the persona. It is the mask we build to move through the social world. And here is something important that most people misunderstand. The persona is not a lie. It is not weakness. It is a completely normal and even necessary part of being human. We all wear different versions of ourselves in different rooms. The person you are at work is not identical to the person you are with your oldest friend or alone at 2 a.m. That flexibility is not fake. It is social intelligence. The problem, the one Jung devoted decades to understanding, is not that we have a persona. The problem is when we forget that it is a mask, when we start believing that the mask is the face, when we have worn it so long, in so many rooms for so many people, that we genuinely cannot remember what we look like underneath it. That is not adaptation anymore. That is loss. And the cruelest part is that from the outside, everything still looks fine. You are functioning. You are achieving. You are liked. People call you reliable, professional, put together, and you smile when they say it because you know it is true, and you also know that something about being called those things makes you feel strangely invisible, because what they are seeing is the performance, and you have been performing for so long that you are not even sure there is an audience left inside you anymore. Jung described this condition with a precision that still feels radical. He said that most of what people call fate is actually the unconscious, the patterns you keep falling into, the relationships that repeat, the opportunities you consistently miss or destroy, the feeling that life is happening to you rather than through you. None of it is random. All of it is being driven by material inside you that has never been brought into the light. Material that accumulates precisely because you have spent so much energy managing your outer image that your inner world has been left in the dark. This is the origin of the peculiar exhaustion so many people carry without being able to name it. It is not physical tiredness. Sleep does not fix it. Vacations do not fix it. Promotions do not fix it. It is the exhaustion of a person who has been maintaining two lives simultaneously. The one the world sees and the one that was never allowed to be seen. Carrying both of those, day after day, year after year, is genuinely one of the most draining things a human being can do. Now, here's where it gets deeper. Because once you understand the persona, a natural question arises. If the mask is not who I am, then who is? And Jung's answer to that question is one of the most important ideas in all of psychological thought. He said that beneath the persona, beneath the social self you have carefully constructed, there is something he called the self. Not the ego, not the personality, not the collection of roles you play. The self, capital S, the deep organizing center of the entire psyche. The part of you that knows, at some level below all the noise, what you actually need, what actually has meaning, and what direction your life is supposed to move in. The tragedy is that most people spend their entire lives never meeting this part of themselves, not because it is hidden behind some mystical door, but because they are simply always too busy looking outward, too busy monitoring how they are being perceived, too busy adjusting, performing, comparing, competing, and seeking confirmation from a world that cannot actually give them what they are looking for. And this brings us to comparison. Because comparison is not just a habit, it is not just insecurity dressed up in social media. From a Jungian perspective, comparison is a philosophical act. Every time you look at another person's life and measure your own against it, you are making an implicit claim that their path is the standard and yours is the deviation. You are declaring that there is one correct way to move through life, one correct timeline, one correct set of achievements by one correct age, and that whoever departs from it is falling behind. Jung rejected this with everything he had. He did not reject it sentimentally, with the kind of motivational softness that says everyone is special in their own way. He rejected it structurally. He said the psyche does not work that way. Each human being carries a unique unconscious architecture, a unique pattern of strengths, wounds, gifts, and blind spots that has never existed before and will never exist again. The process by which a person develops, matures, and comes into their full nature is therefore also unique. It cannot be scheduled, it cannot be compared, it cannot be accelerated by watching someone else run faster. When you try to force your development into someone else's timeline, you do not become more successful, you become more fractured, you begin making choices that are right for their path and wrong for yours. You invest energy into things that have no meaning for you, because they appear to have meaning for people whose timelines you have borrowed. And the strange, disorienting result is that you can be very busy, very productive, very visibly accomplished, and feel completely empty, because none of it was ever really yours. The person who changes careers 3 times in their 30s while their peers settle into stability is not failing. They may be doing precisely what their psyche requires in order to find genuine direction. The person who takes a year to grieve something others recovered from in months is not weak. They may be processing something at a depth that others never had to reach. The person who cannot make a decision that others find obvious is not broken. They may be listening to something inside themselves that is trying to tell them the obvious answer is wrong for who they actually are. Slowness in Jungian psychology is not always loss. Sometimes it is the psyche doing the work that matters most, underground, invisible, before anything can legitimately grow above the surface. The mistake is in judging the roots by the absence of the flower. But here's what makes this genuinely hard. Because even when you understand all of this, even when you nod along and recognize yourself in every word, there is still something that persists. A voice, not exactly loud, not exactly mean, but constant, watching, judging. And the shocking discovery that Jung made, the one that changes everything when you really sit with it, is that this voice is not other people. It never was. Jung called it projection, the psychological mechanism by which we take our own unacknowledged inner material and assign it to the world around us. When you feel like everyone is judging you, when you walk into a room and feel scrutinized, when a look from a colleague or a silence from a friend can derail your entire day, the most uncomfortable truth is that the judgment is coming from inside, not from outside, from the part of yourself that you have never permitted to be wrong, the part of yourself that learned, early and painfully, that certain aspects of who you are not acceptable, not lovable, not safe to show. Jung called this the shadow. Everything that the persona excludes, every impulse, desire, quality, and truth that did not make it into the socially acceptable version of you. And the shadow does not disappear because you ignore it. It goes underground, and from underground, it runs. It drives the overreactions you cannot explain. It drives the patterns you keep repeating in relationships. It drives the criticism you give to others that you are actually giving to yourself. It drives the fear of being seen, because being seen might mean what is hidden inside might finally be visible. The moment you begin to understand projection is the moment the world becomes significantly less terrifying. Not because people stop having opinions about you, they do not, but because you stop needing to give those opinions the power to define you. When you realize that the harshest judge in your life lives inside you, and when you begin to turn toward that judge with curiosity rather than more self-rejection, something extraordinary begins to happen. The world quiets down. Not because it changed, but because you stopped loading it with meaning it was never supposed to carry. This is the work Jung pointed toward. And it does not happen in the middle of noise. It does not happen while you are busy, distracted, or performing. It happens in solitude, real solitude, the kind most people spend enormous energy avoiding. There is a story we tell about solitude that is almost entirely wrong. We frame it as something that happens to you when life goes badly. You are alone because you are unpopular, unsuccessful, or unlucky. We treat it as a condition to be escaped rather than a practice to be cultivated. But Jung saw solitude as not just useful, but necessary. Not a consolation for those who cannot manage connection, but the specific environment in which the most important inner work becomes possible. The reason is precise. The self cannot speak over the crowd. When you are constantly surrounded by input, opinion, expectation, and reaction, your attention is always outward. There is simply no room for the inner voice to be heard. Not because it stops speaking, but because you stop being quiet enough to listen. Solitude creates the conditions under which the unconscious can surface, under which avoided questions can finally be asked, under which the person you have been performing for others can briefly step aside and the person beneath can breathe. This is terrifying for most people. And the reason it is terrifying is not what they usually say it is. People say they do not like being alone because they get bored or lonely or restless. But underneath that, what they are almost always avoiding is the content, the things that come up when there is no one else to focus on, the sadness that has no name, the desires that have been so long suppressed they feel like foreign objects, the questions that have no comfortable answers, the slow, creeping recognition that some of the choices made in the name of being acceptable were made at an enormous personal cost. Solitude forces that confrontation. And while the confrontation is uncomfortable, it is also the only path to something Jung considered the highest achievement of a human life, becoming genuinely, completely, irreversibly yourself. He called this individuation, the lifelong process of integrating every aspect of who you are, including and especially the parts that were exiled, into a coherent and authentic whole. It is not about perfection. It is not about resolution. It is about wholeness, about stopping the war against parts of yourself and beginning, instead, to listen to what they have been trying to tell you all along. This process is not comfortable. It was never meant to be. Jung described it as similar to the work of alchemy, the ancient practice of transforming base materials into something refined and precious. The alchemists believed you could not skip any stage of the process. You could not rush the transformation. Any attempt to accelerate it, to bypass the necessary dissolution, produced not gold, but something unstable and false. The inner life works the same way. You cannot shortcut your way to genuine selfhood by simply deciding to be more confident or less affected by criticism. The transformation requires actual encounter with what is inside, actual willingness to sit in the uncertainty of not yet knowing who you are without the mask, actual tolerance of the discomfort that comes with beginning to live differently before the new way of living has solidified into something that feels natural. This is the part no one tells you about because it does not make for a clean story. The middle of the journey is messy. It is marked by confusion rather than clarity, by questioning more than answers. But Jung insisted that this confusion is not a sign that you have gone wrong. It is a sign that the old structure is making room for something truer to emerge. Individuation is not a destination. It is a direction. You do not arrive at it one morning and announce that you are now fully yourself. You move toward it, gradually and often through discomfort, through a series of inner encounters that require honesty, courage, and a patience almost impossible to find in a culture that prizes speed and noise. But the people who undertake this journey, even imperfectly, even slowly, even partially, report something that cannot be faked: a quality of presence, a steadiness, not the rigid steadiness of someone who has shut themselves off from the world, but the supple steadiness of someone who is no longer trying to be anyone other than who they are. People recognize it even if they cannot name it. It is the quality of someone who does not need the room to react to them in order to know they are okay. Someone who can be praised without becoming dependent on the praise and criticized without collapsing. Someone who can disagree calmly because their sense of self is not constructed from your agreement. Jung believed this quality was not a personality type. It was not something you were born with. It was something you earned through the difficult work of turning inward, confronting what you find there, and refusing to hand that authority back to the world. And this is where the phrase at the center of this video earns its full meaning. Focus only on yourself. It is not a selfish instruction. It is not permission to be cold, dismissive, or careless about the people in your life. It is a philosophical and psychological directive pointing towards something most people have never seriously attempted. To take the attention and energy you currently direct outward, toward the opinions of others, the standards of the culture, the timelines of your peers, and bring it home. To invest it in knowing yourself, really knowing yourself, not the version you perform, not the version that got you here, the version that has been waiting quietly underneath all of it. What does this look like in practice? It looks like pausing before you speak and asking, not will this be accepted, but is this actually true? It looks like sitting with discomfort instead of reaching for distraction, because discomfort is often the psyche pointing at something important. It looks like making one choice, small or large, not because it will impress anyone, but because something inside you knows it is right for who you are. It looks like tolerating the anxiety of not being praised and discovering, slowly, that you do not dissolve without it. It looks like solitude that is not filled, mornings with your own thoughts before the phone is checked, evenings that are not performances for anyone, moments where you ask yourself what you actually want, not what you should want, not what would look good, not what would finally make the voice quiet, but what you actually want, and then, crucially, taking what you hear seriously. Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is becoming who you truly are. He meant it exactly. It is a privilege because most people never claim it, not because they lack the capacity, but because the noise is too loud, the fear is too familiar, and the cost of the work seems impossibly high from the outside. But here is what he also knew, and what becomes clear to anyone who does this work. The cost of not doing it is higher. The cost is a life that functions but does not feel like yours. A life that looks successful from the outside and feels hollow from the inside. It's a life spent waiting for someone else to tell you that you are enough, while the only part of you that could actually tell you that is being kept in the dark. You do not need the world to confirm who you are. This is not arrogance. It is the natural result of actually knowing. When you have done the work of turning inward, of confronting the shadow, of peeling back the persona and sitting with what is underneath, you develop something that no external validation can give you and no external criticism can take away. Jung called it inner coherence, the experience of being aligned with yourself, of having your thoughts, your actions, and your deepest values moving in the same direction rather than constantly pulling against each other. It does not make life perfect. It does not eliminate loss or difficulty or the ordinary weight of being alive, but it changes the texture of everything. Because when you are no longer spending your energy on maintaining a gap between who you are and who you are pretending to be, that energy becomes available for living, fully, presently, without the constant background hum of performance anxiety that most people have accepted as just the normal sound of being human. The world does not need another perfect performance. It needs the thing that only you can give it, your actual self, brought forward not to be judged, not to be approved, but to be lived, completely and without apology. This is what Jung pointed toward. Not isolation, not indifference, not some cold philosophical retreat from the warmth of human connection, but something rarer and more demanding than any of those. The willingness to stop outsourcing your identity to the world, to stop letting the noise outside drown out the signal inside, to finally, after everything, come home to yourself. And the strange paradox that every person discovers who takes this seriously, the paradox Jung described with quiet certainty, is that the more genuinely you inhabit yourself, the more genuinely you can inhabit your relationships, your work, and your place in the world. Not because you have become more impressive or more palatable or more anything the world was asking for, but because you have stopped being absent. You are finally, actually, truly there. That is the end of the performance, the beginning of the life.